we'll bring this meeting to order, and please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, and welcome to the regular meeting of the Port of West Sacramento, December 5, 2012. We did have a closed session. I will turn to the attorney and ask, is there anything to report out of closed session?
Thank you. The commission met in closed session to consider initiation of litigation in connection with Department of Finance's denial of the ROPS. No action was taken.
All right, thank you very much. Next, we have on the agenda presentations by members of the public on matters not otherwise on the agenda but within the jurisdiction of the Port Commission. I don't have any requests to speak on that item. Is there anyone here this evening that wishes to speak on that item? Seeing no requests, we'll go to consent, items 2 and 3. Is there a motion to approve consent? So moved. Moving second. All in favor? I believe it is unanimous. Thank you very much. Now I'll go to our regular agenda, and this is a continuation of a lot of work and study and analysis and discussion. Port Business Plan Workshop on Cargo Analysis and Real Estate Revenue and Introduction to Potential Port Operating Models. Now, let me say at the outset, I believe that this is still essentially a presentation of information, and we're not we may give some insights as to how we feel about things, but we're not taking action tonight. Is that
Exactly.
fair to say on this item?
Yes.
Matter of fact, it will be. Would you remind us of what sort of the schedule is for?
Well, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, this is a timely workshop. As we kicked off on November 14th, the slide before you, we are about 2/3 of the way, or not, maybe 1/3 of the way through a business plan development process with final adoption by the Commission slated for February 20th. So we have a lot of time to gather public input and really get enough data so that you can make decisions on the future of the port in time for your meeting on February 20th. On November 14th, as you recall, we did a financial overview of the port. Very good session developed by the port's finance team. Tonight, the focus is on cargo analysis, the amount of revenue that the port has historically received from cargo and from real estate, and a projection of the cargo in the future. That will be done by Rick Toff, and we're very fortunate that SSA will have Mark Knutson speaking on their perspective on cargo as well. Our next session is on January 9th. We'll focus on operating model alternatives, and we'll have a little discussion on that tonight, but we'll go in depth on that on January 9th, with also an overview of the Seaway property. If we can't get through the cargo assessment, we could look at maybe having a longer session on the 9th to cover that. But there's also been some discussion, and you might want to consider this tonight, of a community workshop once we're done with the session on the 9th, maybe pulling all of the sectors together on the draft business plan and drawing community input prior to your meeting on January 23rd. But we are in a real in-depth view of the port and its future, and probably without further ado, jump right into introducing Rick. Rick?
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Tuttle. Good evening, Commissioners. In addition to Mark Knutson with SSA, who will follow my presentation, I wanted to point out that Don Grigg is here this evening. Don was the chief author of the 2005 Maritime Demand Analysis when the city was looking at taking control of the port. So tonight's workshop is focused on port revenues with an emphasis on cargo revenues. The cargo analysis attached to your staff report is the supporting document that provides the detail and the basis for tonight's presentation. So this is a snapshot of the budget which Port Treasurer Phil Wright presented to the commission last month, and you'll see that we boxed two revenue categories in red: real estate and service charges. Those are the two real revenue sources for the port. And just to point out, service charges is the way that the finance department describes cargo revenues. So the port generates approximately a little over $2.3 million in gross revenues from two sources, as I just mentioned, cargo and real estate. This chart reallocates revenues to isolate North Terminal cargo operations. So the North Terminal is what we all think of as the port, coming off of Harbor Boulevard, and that's really where all of our cargo operations take place. So the blue in this chart represents the income generated by the revenue sharing provisions in the SSA Terminal Management Agreement. And most of the port's expenses are associated with this blue, including maintenance, capital improvements, business development, utilities, etc. The green represents real estate leases and licenses, and this piece of the pie goes almost entirely to the bottom line and is not subject to revenue sharing with SSA. This map illustrates by location what we just talked about, the blue and the red, with the blue representing the North Terminal cargo revenue source, and each green area represents a specific real estate lease or license. And you'll notice off to the left and the bottom there are two companies, Cemex and Agreement, which actually operate their own facilities that are not on the North Terminal. And we have a wider view, which we'll show you at the end of this presentation, which gives you a better picture of their location relative to the North Terminal. But both of those companies lease submerged land in the ship channel from the port for their vessel berthing facilities. This map, we flip back, sorry, Aaron. This map also shows a black area, which is the bulk cargo facility side of the port. And this area has been largely vacant for 3 years and currently does not generate any revenue. So here's a quick look at the real estate detail. And just a couple things I want to point out here. Cemex at the top is our largest agreement, representing 40% of the port's real estate revenue, I'm sorry. And then the other thing that I would mention is that the West Coast Recycling land lease revenue, the third one down, does carry some risk with it until that facility is actually built. Okay, so let's move on to cargo. And first, a review of cargo revenues since the city took control of the port in 2006. So we executed the terminal operations management agreement with SSA in October of 2006, and we have now 5 full fiscal years of cargo data represented in this chart since that time. So starting at the top, I'll discuss the 4 different cargoes that we've handled over that 5-year period. First, you can kind of see the colors, although the blues and purples are kind of looking similar here. Fertilizer in purple at the top. You can see that it generated revenue for 3 years, kind of wound down over a 3-year period, and finally came to an end in fiscal year 9-10, and that's when the shipper that was bringing us that cargo, Yara, completed their new facility in Stockton and relocated to Stockton. Moving down to the green, project cargo, those are the large windmill components that you've probably seen at the port. You can see that it's very sporadic. We had a great year in 08-09, followed by nothing the following year, and pretty modest revenue since that time. Moving down to cement, shown in red. Cement actually was a new cargo for us starting in 2007 when the Two Rivers, what we now call the Two Rivers facility, was completed. And we saw revenues from that facility for a 3-year period. And again, as with fertilizer ending in 2009, that was solely due to the recession and lack of construction and a lack of need for imported cement. So cement will come back, but we haven't seen it since 2009. And finally, rice, the port's staple cargo. And you can see it makes up the lion's share, obviously, of our revenues and has been very consistent, but I would point out that there is some variability there. You can see, for example, between 7.8 and 8.9, about a $700,000 swing in rice revenues. So today, and actually for the last 2 years, you can see the only cargoes that we've handled at the port have been rice and project cargo, with rice making up today about 98% of the cargo revenues that are generated from the North Terminal. Marketing efforts to date have yet to yield any new cargoes. The port's competitive weaknesses have been difficult to overcome, with the 30-foot ship channel being the primary challenge. On the other hand, we do have competitive advantages for rice cement with the two new, in addition to the Two Rivers, we have the Cemex facility on the ground, and project cargo because of our proximity to the Solano County wind area. We have some advantages for those 3 cargoes. So we're going to now switch and look ahead to the next 4 years. So this is kind of a continuum, and we're in the middle of fiscal year 12-13. This chart is organized a little bit differently. We've taken those 3 cargoes that I just mentioned, and this time I'll start at the bottom, what we consider our base cargoes, rice, cement, and project cargo, and we've lumped them together into a composite category, which is supposed to be blue, but kind of gray looking there. And these are the cargoes that we consider to be a dependable source of revenue now and going forward, and for which the port has the competitive advantages which I just described. So the 4 other cargo categories that are represented here, I'm not going to go through them all in detail. Those are kind of discussed in detail in the cargo analysis, but I just want to point out here that they are presented in this chart in an order of likelihood. In other words, as one moves up the chart columns, the revenue becomes increasingly speculative. So really the takeaway from this chart is that the blue, just go back real quick, the blue base really should be used for conservative budgeting, but there is potential upside from these various other cargoes. So moving on to summary conclusions, I'm not going to read through all the bullet points here. Maybe we can just skip ahead in the interest of time tonight to the conclusions. And that is that the port's current operating model is not financially sustainable given the low levels of cargo volume and the port's costs, and that given the higher net revenues from real estate, the landlord model is an approach that will generate significantly higher net revenues. So briefly, this is the map that I referred to earlier. This is a wider angle view. It shows you the Cemex and the Agrium facilities, and again shows you by location, revenue by cargo in the blue, and real estate in the green. So that's really, I'm going to conclude my remarks with that in the interest of time, and given the other speakers here tonight and the folks that I know have questions. Aaron, do you have anything to add?
No, actually, I would just say at this time, if we had questions on the cargo analysis, it'd probably be a good time to take those up. But we do have the presentation from SSA and some quick remarks from Don Grigg to get to. So
I will ask if there are any preliminary questions on the cargo analysis.
There is. I have one. Can you go back to two screens, the two screens before this one? So the under the service charges, one more back. Sorry. So this only represents the north terminal cargo projections. So this is 56% of the budget. So what is the? I mean, if we were to, I need to sort of simplify it for myself. So if we were to identify a target just to break even, without any subsidies, based on where we're headed for 12-13. What is the target? What is our target for this source of revenue for 12-13? I mean, what? Obviously, I mean you're identifying 1.3, and then it goes to 1.4, and then it progressively goes up. But what is the target? Just and I just pick a break-even point just to give me a point of reference for what we should be looking for versus what is being projected.
Well, the problem is that all of our costs are associated with not all, but the lion's share of our costs are associated with cargo operations. So to break even on an annual basis, we would have to achieve some cost reduction to come in line with the blue portion of this column. We're not there right now. That would require a cost reduction effort to bring our cash flow to a break-even point.
if I could just add to that, that's part of the exercise of the next layer of analysis is to get to the net revenue of the cargo side. We do need to look at what the costs of the port are right now to generate that revenue, and that'll be part of the operating model analysis.
That's coming up as well. Okay. All right. I'm just trying to make sure I'm getting my head around it.
Well, let me just see if I can understand it. I think we're kind of the same thing on this 5-year cargo history graph. Basically, for the FY 11-12, you show 1.4 for rice and a pittance for cement, and I guess there was some. Oh, excuse me, project cargo. There's nothing to, and if I'm wrong, let me know. Maybe SSA can answer this, but there's nothing to suggest that that's going to change much in the next year or two.
That's right. So
fertilizer's not coming back.
Fertilizer's not coming back. Cement will come back, but not. We're forecasting a slow ramp up late 14, 15 with cement. I'm sorry, but you're right. We're looking at in the near term just rice and a little project cargo.
And even if we get the bulk or the scrap metal or even a new cargo that we haven't talked about, or Enigma comes back or whatever, it's still not going to happen in a year or two.
No. So if you flip to that following slide, the 4-year projections, you'll see that we have anticipated a little revenue from scrap metal starting in 14-15. That obviously is dependent on the West Coast recycling facility getting built. We did.
But if you build a budget around that anticipation, it doesn't happen. Then you're going to be short again. And
right.
I think what we're talking about here at this juncture is, so how can we do a budget based on what we know, not what we hope?
The budget should be based on the base gray color there, and that's essentially, that's rice, it's project cargo, and as of 14-15, it's a little cement. So it's really a conservative revenue projection at that level.
Mr. Chair, if I can ask a question.
Yes.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thanks, Rick. Just on I'm looking at the 4-year projection here into 15-16. and the base cargo, and it's a what 33% increase from over 4 years to get that way. And I guess my question, looking at the 5-year history, it was that way. I think we were at that point in 2008. It looks like Project Cement and Rice. And I'm trying to understand, is it ever consistently, even prior to this 5 years, been at a level where it was hitting that level of cargo coming through?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, you can look back at 8-9, for example, and we had a very nice rice year in 8-9, and part of the reason for the increase is we actually depressed the projection for 12-13 down to 1.3 versus, you can see in 11-12 the actual was almost 1.5. And the reason for that is we don't anticipate any bulk rice this current shipping season. So because we've depressed 12-13, you're going to see a higher rate of growth over that 4-year period. But if you look at the 5-year average of bulk rice, we typically get some bulk rice. So the subsequent years have 40,000 tons of bulk rice plugged in.
But I think also the primary reason for the revenue increase in 14-15 and outward is an anticipation of cement, and there is some obvious, obviously there's some speculation on the rate of that increase, but it has been a cargo that has been based on economic conditions primarily, and there is an expectation of a return there. So that's why you see primarily.
And that would be my kind of what's the basis of the assumption of moving up that quickly? Because I think that's the part that we want to get away from.
Right.
Speculative and hopeful projection-based budgeting to.
So I can give you the absolute numbers for cement starting in 14-15. We have $89,000, a very modest sum forecast for 14-15, and in 15-16 we've plugged in $200,000, and
that's for, I'm sorry, that's for cement in years.
That's just cement, yeah.
In years 14-15 is 89,000, and 15-16.
200,000, 201,000 actually in 15-16. So 12-13 is just rice, and it's just bagged rice.
Okay.
And a very small amount for project cargo. Same for 13-14. Again, looking at those other colors, I mean, that's gravy. Really, we're not budgeting with those numbers. So we absolutely took a very conservative approach on these numbers.
Yes, Mark. Commissioner.
Yeah, I think I'd take even a more conservative tack. I mean, if I was in business, all this revenue looks like a prayer because we're not contractually obligated to. There's no contract that's going to guarantee this. So, I think even the base is an assumption, and I think we all acknowledge that. The base could go away. I mean, couldn't Stockton take the business, for example? So even the most conservative projection that you have may not be conservative enough. I mean, we basically don't have guaranteed money coming in. And the biggest problem is we've got maintenance, we've got capital improvements, that it's the nut that now the port's going to have to crack, but also that's going to flow down. I think the ultimate payor will be the city in this. So I'm just really skeptical about any of the numbers on here because we've been here in the past looking at projections. This cargo's coming in, that cargo doesn't materialize. Now, there could be a number of reasons why it doesn't. I'm sure the deepening is one of them. We've got now capacity to do certain other cargoes, but I think that all of these numbers are suspect at this point.
Well, there is potential. I mean, the rice is pretty proven, but you're right. There's no guarantees there, and that's why we isolated. If you go back to that pie chart, we isolated revenues to the North Terminal cargo operation for that very reason. That is where all our costs are. versus we do have a guarantee, somewhat of, I think we have contracts in place for the real estate.
And Rick, it might be a good segue into SSA's presentation, given.
Well, except that I have questions too. So, which on the same topic. So, if you're, so on the cement piece, are we just I mean, what's the extent of the modeling around cement, or is it just we see construction activity rising?
You know, we didn't do. This was a staff effort and substantiated by a consultant, but we didn't do an extensive marketing analysis. We did reach out to the cement industry and you know, talk to them about their expectations. And that's the consensus opinion, is that you know, it will be a slow ramp up. 14-15 is the tentative time frame. So, but we're all kind of guessing on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I say that because the cement made particular sense at the time of the last analysis based on the conditions that were present then, and one of those conditions was a superheated construction market. But that's just the demand side. There were also serious constraints on other alternative means of supply. There were constraints on the ability of construction projects to substitute materials other than cement. Those markets have had, and the regulatory environments have had time to adjust as well. And so we ought to be very careful about sort of thinking that the tape is just going to get rewound a little bit, because other things have happened since that time. Other folks have entered the cement market, other facilities have come online, and other alternatives are available in some sectors for construction materials. And so I think we do need to be skeptical in that arena. And rice is more stable for sure, but we've already, I mean, it's volatile in the ongoing competition between us and Stockton, right? So we don't, I mean, the challenge for these kind of forecasts is that because we know we have zero slack left, right? We have no cash reserves. We don't have the ability to absorb any shocks on the demand side, and so we have to be, you know, extremely conservative. I mean, I agree completely with what what Commissioner Johannesson said, is that as we do these kinds of forecasts, I think even breaking that base number into like an actual base and then a reasonable forecast, and I'm not quibbling at all with the forecast that you have, but that's still somewhat optimistic. You have assumptions in there that we can't afford to have wrong. And so even breaking that increasing number, the 30% figure that Mr. Liddessen was describing out, I think would be helpful. The other dynamic of this is not all cargo is created equally. The value of the port as an economic engine varies, right? So some cargoes contribute to economic growth in the region, whether in the city or in the broader region by by providing an export market for local production, creating jobs here. So they have some value to the region that without the port we wouldn't be creating. That has implications for who's willing to help subsidize the work of the port. Others, whether it's iron ore, some of these other products that they're just stopping here, and there's no other economic activity being created, is a different matter altogether. And whether sort of the level of commitment, how much are we going to ask the city to contribute in terms of subsidies? The question of what's the value matters a great deal. So as we're looking at the cargo analysis over time, paying attention to the value of the cargo in dollar terms, but also the value of the cargo in economic and jobs terms for the community and for the region, I think is a for me at least a critical part of the equation. And rice actually is one of those tweeners, because the rice industry has proven that it is comfortable in some respects going through Stockton. I mean, we may or may not be indispensable to the rice industry. I'd like to think that we are. I wish they would see that more often. But if we're not indispensable, then we shouldn't exist just to provide a slight cost benefit to the rice industry. If it's just as good from their perspective to switch back and forth and to pit us against Stockton in terms of of rates. So I want to keep looking at the cargo analysis. The raw numbers are really helpful, and they're critical. Obviously, they're critical to our bottom line, but there's a lot more inside of here that matters a lot for the overall business plan.
Thank you. And if there aren't any more questions, we'll thank you, Rick, and then we'll go to SSA. I'm going to apologize. I do have to go to a different venue right now, but what's that? I'll turn this over to our Vice Chair, Mr. Yegas, who's got all kinds of good things to say, so God bless.
So just for time management purposes, how long are you expecting your presentation to be?
5 minutes?
5 minutes, perfect. All right.
Great. Well, good evening, I guess, at this point. Thanks for the opportunity to come talk to you. I'm Mark Knutson with SSA Marine, president of their conventional group, which is all of our break bulk and bulk cargoes. We operate about 125 facilities around the U.S., handling everything from Boeing airplane wings in Everett to animal feed in Wilmington, Carolina. So, but I thought I'd go through a little bit with real quick the history. As you know, we're in the management agreement with the Port of West Sacramento. Started in 2006. Obviously handle the products here. A couple of things that we've done along the way is streamline the operations there by the consolidation of labor forces. Over the last 2 years, we invested about $850,000 in the port to upgrade the conveyors, to get the conveyor system working so we could go after some of the ore cargoes that we think may be out there. And we've spent a fair amount of money investing in new CARB-compliant forklifts. At the same time, the port has gone about it as well. The port's invested in a fair amount in trying to create unit train capability, which we think is critical for any cargo that's not local origin to be able to bring in here as unit train capability on the UP. You've acquired the harbor crane through the grant process that you've had there. The new warehouse has been useful for attracting additional and handling some of the rice cargo, and you've done a lot of site improvements as well. I think when we look at your port, there's a couple of things that really stand out. When you look overall at how shippers look at where they're pricing and where they're putting things, the three main components are rail costs, port costs, and the ocean freight costs. And the numbers you see in front of you, the rail costs, usually from a destination 500 miles plus in, is somewhere around 20 to 30 tons, or $30 a ton. The port costs are around $10 to $15 a ton, and all the work that we've done and that the port has done to try and streamline things, we're really playing around that $10 to $15 number out of the entire piece. The critical one is the ocean freight cost. Ocean freight, depending on the size of the vessel and how many hatches you're filling and what you're doing, is $30 to $50 a ton. So you can see as you look at Sacramento and where your competitive positioning is, at the 30-foot water depth and the ability to only fill maybe 2 out of the 5 hatches or 3 out of the 5 hatches, whatever you can do there, you're at a critical disadvantage to other ports with deeper water. And channel depth is a challenge, and we know that the struggle that you've been through to try and create that channel depth, and I don't think any of us can hope that's going to happen anytime soon, although it's a critical ingredient. As we spent the money on the conveyors, we've been out reaching out to the companies. If you look over the past 3 years, this is the level of companies that we've either reached out to or we've given bids to try and attract their business in here. And multiple customers out of that group have been engaged, but the economics in the end haven't worked. And probably a good sort of poignant example is earlier this year we were dealing with Solvay Chemicals, which is a soda ash producer out of southern Wyoming, on the UP rail line, main line. The improvements that you made to be able to attract unit trains down here was critical to getting them here. They came down, they were very interested in it. You had the unit train capacity. You had the ability to give them a dedicated facility in here. They're currently shipping their product out of the Columbia River system. When it came down to it, they were out on an RFP. When they came down to it, this facility had everything they needed, but when they went to the economics of their ocean freight, they couldn't make the overall economics of the terminal work. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, that ocean freight number is a big one, and it's a challenge for us. So when you go to the kind of path looking forward, the rail improvements are there for anything. You really have 2 cargoes here, your local origin destination cargo and stuff that you can compete with other ports for. For the business that you can compete with other ports, rail improvements are absolutely essential, but they're not really necessarily sufficient. we look at your revenue stream, the revenue stream that you were just talking through, the revenue stream on your traditional sources are stable. We don't see them growing dramatically. We think that's something, I think your questions on how solid the growth predictions are, we would question that as well. It really boils down to, we think you really need to be focusing on how to further reduce the expenses. And the important point for us is that this local origin destination cargo, that's going to drive the local origin destination, is really going to drive your cargo flows. That speaks to the rice products. It speaks some to the cement products. But this inland cargo, the inland origin cargo, has multiple destinations, and for us to compete for that is difficult. We've got the site, we've got the ability to handle it, but it's a challenge to do that. When we look into the future, as you've already been talking about, rice really is the base cargo. That may grow, but rice also not only can go to a different port, but it can go into containers, and I think we need to keep that functional mode in mind, because pricing, transportation costs, other things can flip that cargo around. The revenue beyond the rice cargo, from our perspective, is not something that we think we can rely on. We think there's lots of opportunities there. We've obviously invested a ton of money in the conveyor system based on some of those opportunities. Project cargoes is sporadic. The wind farm cargoes, maybe there's some tax credits that come back into play, and maybe that business lights up again. But again, that's something that we'd look for into the future. You've got this wide competition. And then really, I guess our final point is that the finances of the port need to be sustained on this base lease revenues and the revenues from rice cargo. When you go back to your previous presentation, you had about $3 million in expenses that are allocated to the port system on I think the second slide from the previous presentation. Out of there, you've got about $2 million in revenue that are coming from your base leases and from your terminal operations. So without debt service, before you put that into the equation, you're $1 million in the hole on the port. And I think what our focus would be is to work with the city and the port staff to try and figure out, is there a way to crack that $1 million nut, and can we bring this port back into, at least in what you refer to as the North Terminal Cargo Area, can we do a combination? And I think the combination is primarily on the expense reduction side to bring that terminal back into a break-even status. SSA is committed to working with the port and city staff here to try and figure that problem out. We've invested a lot of time and management and capital into this port. We don't see this port as the next big boom, but we do see this port as a long-term, stable niche port that can handle the local cargo and effectively compete for certain cargoes beyond that. I guess our position that we want you to know is that we're very interested in working with the port to try and crack that problem. We completely understand, and as a business model ourselves, having a port that's running at a continual deficit is not where anyone should be. It's not healthy for you, and it's not healthy for us. And we'd like to be engaged in the process as it moves forward. And again, thanks for the time.
Great. Thank you very much. Very helpful. All right. So in the interest of time, and we only have 5 minutes left, so we're going to ask, we have 4 slips to speak, and as indicated earlier by the chair, we are going to have a series of other meetings, potentially even another workshop coming up in early January. So I have 4 slips to speak. We have 5 minutes left, and we're supposed to provide at least 3 minutes per speaker, so I would ask that if you are speaking, if you can move it quicker. Otherwise, we just put a limit on the amount of time. But if you can move quickly through your points, we'll start off with David Balsey. You're going to pass? Thank you very much. So if the next speaker is ready, Rena Smith. This will provide the commission with an opportunity to at least wrap up and before we head into closed session at 6 o'clock. Excuse me, council closed session.
Hello, how are you guys?
Good evening.
My name is Rena Way. I'm Secretary-Treasurer of ILW Local 18. My family's lived in West Sacramento for 50 years, myself for 25. On behalf of my local, we would like to request the budgets for the port from 2006 when the city of West Sacramento took over, just for review. If you guys could point me in the right direction, maybe it's a phone call, a slip I got to put in, but I would like to request those budgets, please.
Sure. Okay, great.
Thank you.
All right. Take care of that. Thank you very much. And Tim Campbell. All right. You do that, Derek. Good evening.
Derek Peterson, President, Local 18 Longshore Division. Born and raised here in West Sacramento. Family came here in '64 when the port formed its union here. So the port is the reason why I'm here. couple things. Earlier today, a comment was made at a meeting that the revenue and the operation gap wasn't that big. The port isn't really, maybe cash-wise we're in trouble, but we're pretty wealthy in land. As we always complain, we keep selling, whittling away at it. Comments were made about dredging, how important it is. Well, if it's so important, how are we losing $10 million for dredging right now? It's ridiculous. I can't figure this one out. We started the dredging project 16 years ago in the turning basin. Got 35 feet in the turning basin. We just lack everything else. Why can't we use that money and go as far as $10 million will get us? And then we'll move on and try to get money somewhere else. That seems like that was the goal at the beginning. At least we started. Now, money's being pulled away from the port to do other things. A couple meetings ago, didn't we hear about $300,000 being diverted somewhere else? Seems like the most important issue everybody's talking about is dredging. We keep trying to steal or give the money back. Don't make no sense to me. There's a report out that in multiple places, I take it, maybe I read it wrong, blames or puts fault into the ILWU. Why this place isn't successful. We cost too much money, we aren't competitive. In that report, it doesn't say we have the only food grade facility on the West Coast. Why isn't a highlight there? But it says I'm cost too much money in the backlands, and we aren't competitive to other ports. I think we are competitive to other ports. Maybe we just need to stop going after other ports' cargoes and try to get our own. And it's easier said than done. You guys, I know and I appreciate what you guys do, but I am very frustrated when you have SSA, you have the port employees themselves say dredging, 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 but yet we drop the ball and we lose money, or it's going to go to something else other than dredging. Convince me why that money can't be used for what it was intended, and that's it. I mean, the last thing, these are very important topics to some people. I don't want to move. My kids go to these schools. And it seems like if the port doesn't go away, I'm happy. That's just me. You look at the clock at every meeting, we got 10 minutes. Hey, could you make it quick, please? It's almost like a design to make sure no one comes up and says something that pisses somebody else off. I'm upset. I'm trying to keep my composure and show you guys respect. But something needs to change. And it's getting frustrating because I was against the governance change. And the commissioners convinced me it was the right thing to do, but yet we're still acting.
I'm going to need you to wrap up.
We're still acting as if there's two cities controlling the sport. Nothing positive is going on.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Tim Campbell.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, I'd like to thank Marty Tuttle and Mike Lucan. They've been taking a lot of their time out meeting with the union, getting us up to speed on the plan, what their ideas are, getting information together. It's been instrumental, and I thank these men for that. There's three things that are key issues. First of all, I'm Tim Campbell. I'm the Vice President of Longshore Union Local 18. I'm also a resident. There's three things they talked about: the infrastructure, water depth, and the high cost of ILW labor. I want to touch on each one of those. Our infrastructure needs improvement, that's correct. Lack of maintenance, didn't have the money to do it back then, we don't have money to do it now. But our conveying systems are competitive. I work on them myself. Our water depth, this is the most crucial thing to our port. Right now at 30 feet, we can only service 30% of the ships. At 35 feet, we could service 75% of the ships. You build it, they'll come. You can't bring somebody into something that's not functional. And you're asking these people to sign long-term agreements to move millions of tons of cargo. They'd have to do dual port calls. They'd have to have multiple ports in order to keep the cargoes there to keep it flowing. It's unsuccessful. It's unsuccessful, and it's unrealistic to ask SSA and the city to even negotiate these contracts. It's not going to work. Everybody's going to pull out. You noticed all the numbers that came up on the screen up there of how many companies came around, how many companies stuck. There's a big problem. That's the problem. It's crucial that we get our dredging money. It's crucial that we keep our dredging money. I know we want to do it to build a bridge for new goods movement, to keep Jefferson freed up so we don't impede the traffic. I understand all that as well. But I think we should go after another grant for that, see how we can keep this grant, maybe cut a deal with somebody. Second thing, or third thing, is the ILWU labor is a highly competent, highly skilled workforce. We've been out there since 1963, since the start of the port. We'll be out there if this thing gets successful or when the doors close. These landlord leases, bring your own terminal, bring your own stuff, bring your own labor force. It's not going to happen. We have contracts, and we're going to live by them, and we're going to operate, and we're going to let the employer operate freely with men as needed, with a flexible workforce. ILW Local 17 come up in there multiple times. No one discussed how rigid they were. Guess what? I was ILW Local 17. When these guys went away, it's because the port couldn't keep business there. That's why they went away. The workforce didn't shrink because the demand for labor was there. There was no cargo to keep them there. So everybody talks about they went away. They didn't went away. They were forced away. And the only reason we stayed is because we carried the core competent knowledge on how to keep these facilities running. I'll wrap it up. I know you. Our labor is not a disadvantage. Our labor is key and instrumental in order landing new customers. So that's all I have on this. I hope you guys consider this plan and everything that's coming down. It's the dredging project which will make our port successful. We have a stevedoring company that is the most successful stevedoring company in the world. Why does everybody listen to everybody but them? Just seems kind of odd to me. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Campbell. I know it seems a bit rushed, and it actually is. I think we've scheduled quite a bit in a very tight schedule this evening. As indicated earlier by the presentation, there are a series of workshops, and we're probably going to be considering some additional ones. Mr. Port Director, do you have any comments, or how would you like us to, I mean, I can turn it back to the Commission for, maybe you'll start that with Mr. Johannesson?
I think, part of the process today was to give staff guidance on what these alternatives are. We're not going to get to that, so I don't know if this is something we could maybe add a meeting next, before the next council meeting, to maybe continue this item to talk about that, because I think we may not get this fleshed out at this meeting, because we are under a time constraint. And the other thing is that I think this dredging issue, we need to get something out that basically discusses what the status is, and the problem is that the federal government, we don't have they're not going to give us the money to do it. We don't have any ability to do more than, 100 feet or something like that with our own resources. So we're really stuck with that. But I just feel like, we need to flesh out at least this workshop a little more than we're doing today.
Yeah, and from the schedule that the Port Director has outlined, we'll have the opportunity to do this. I mean, we're not trying to settle the cargo analysis tonight and then settle some other piece. These things don't exist in a vacuum, and we need to keep working through it. So and we committed to the 5:15 start time, and that has condensed the amount of time that we could devote to this today. But we have lots more scheduled in January to be able to get this done in a complete and full way. I hope, and just on the deepening issue, I hope we don't get. I worry about the framing I'm already hearing emerging, which is without the deepening we have nothing, because we have no prospects for $150 million or for $100 million. So if the future completely, totally depends on deepening, then we don't need to go through January, because we're done. We're finished. We couldn't take the $10 million and dredge. The state would not allow us to take $10 million and say, well, we're going to dredge a half a mile and we'll come back and do the rest some other time. They said the $10 million was to complete the deepening. And if you don't complete the deepening, you don't get the $10 million. So we had no choice. In the absence of a federal appropriation, we could not use that money. And so we have to if we can't walk and chew gum at the same time, if we can't chew on the deepening and make some progress moving forward, then we're out of business. So we need more solutions than the deepening alone, because that is not near term enough for us to operate in the black. And I hope that as we go through the process this month, and certainly much more so in January, once the additional hearings and workshops occur, that we'll be able to drill down to what I hope we will be, what some solutions will emerge.
Thank you. Just a quick comment, and thank you, Mr. Mayor, for bringing up that point, because it's an important point to understand regarding the dredging. And I just want to make the point about the analysis we're seeing tonight, or started to see tonight, and that our direction is hopefully clear, is that we need to see more detail, and I want to make sure the public understands our scrutiny around this and our examination around this, because we are committed to this. This is us engaging in a process of understanding this business from every angle possible, because I think we do know the constraints, and that will require us to really dig into what's real, what we can do, what opportunities we can take advantage of. So for me, I'm hoping staff takes away from this, and I agree with Mr. Johannesson and Mr. Cabalden, moving forward on whatever meetings are necessary, whatever times are available necessary, is to make sure we can get more detail on this, make sure everybody has an opportunity to read what we're seeing, and so we can all come back with a better solution, because we have to make this work one way or the other. So we're just committed to that front. So hopefully staff got enough direction tonight, what we're looking for.
Mr. Board Director, you want to conclude, or is that sufficient?
I think we're fine. We're continuing to get more input on the cargo analysis. We can provide a brief update on the January 9th meeting, but the big focus of that will be the Seaway and the different operating models to get input from the Commission.
Great. All right. Thank you very much. All right. So we'll go very quickly. Manager report, we have none. Board Attorney report, I'm sure we have none. So we're looking for a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second. Thank you very much.